Hello, hello. All right. We are going to be live streaming on a few platforms. So, going to give folks a minute to join. And as a heads up, since I'm doing these sessions solo, I'll do my best to monitor comments and questions here off to the side. But if you miss the session live, or if I miss responding to you live, I'll get back to you in comments after the session. Righty, we'll give folks maybe one more minute to jump on, and then we can get started. Happy Friday to all if you're catching this live. I hope the day is off to a good start for you all. All right, everyone. Glad you're here. And whether you are an HR leader, building a business, managing people, even if you're an employee of a business, you've probably had some of those moments where you thought, why does this feel so much harder than it should? And the truth is that work gets frustrating when we feel like we're doing it alone or we're working against our team, or when we don't understand how and why others operate so differently. But if we take the time and we change how we think about it, right? And those differences maybe aren't the problem, but they can actually be the solution, because our team's quirks and their preferences and the way that they do things can actually be their superpower. And once we can tap into not only our superpowers, but theirs, the potential is unlocked. That's essentially what we're going to be talking about today: how to make work better, how to make it more energizing, how to make it more collaborative, how to feel less guilt for the way that we operate and less judgment for the way that others operate. We're going to use a framework that was created called the Working Genius, created by Patrick Lencioni. You may have heard of one of his many books, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, or The Motive, a few others that he has. But this framework gives a clear, simple language and helps us understand what kinds of work give us energy, what types of work drain us, gives us the same insights about the rest of our team, and how we can build teams that work really well together. Find that compatibility, find that common language. And if that resonates with you, if you see the potential of how that could help your team, I want to invite you to reach out to me. I do half-day workshops where we roll this out for leadership teams, for teams that collaborate often together and maybe can find some improvements on productivity, on collaboration. But we can dive into that a little bit more later. I want to give you an example of how the Working Genius framework and the concept can apply. And one example that I like to use is a musical band, right? You have a drummer, you have a guitarist, a bassist, a singer, maybe someone on keyboards. Everyone has their role, and sometimes they can switch roles. Sometimes the guitarist can also sing, or vice versa. But you don't often find that the band gets frustrated because the drummer isn't singing or the drummer doesn't know how to play the guitar, and no one's yelling at the singer because they don't know how to play the keyboard, right? People are in their zone of genius, really where they shine. They're there for a reason. And then when everything comes together is when they're making music that people actually want to listen to. And that's not too different than what we see in most workplaces. Or actually, it is different than what we see in most workplaces, right? We can easily get frustrated with people that think or operate differently than we do, and then we convert that into a story that's a negative, that's a bad thing, right? We should all be thinking the same. If we were all on the same page, we would be doing things the same way, thinking the same way, when in reality we actually need those different perspectives, those different geniuses, those different skills to have the best outcomes. Because what is the good in having a bunch of tasks completed if they're not actually the right tasks, or if they're counterproductive because we're not aligned with the rest of our team? And that's what I love about the Working Genius, is it really gives us a common language and methodology to get on the same page with our team. And part of that basis is it essentially breaks work into 6 stages that correlate not only with geniuses that people have, but also with stages of work. And it follows the same flow. And as individuals, as people within our own zones of genius, when we're able to leverage our naturally God given talents, it actually energizes us. Whether as opposed to like draining our energy, we get more energy from doing the things that we love. So think about where we're naturally talented and what we really love doing is our zone of genius. Where we're not naturally talented and the energy drains us is our area of frustration. And then there's also this middle ground, which is our competency, things that we can do, but we don't necessarily derive energy or joy from. And each individual person has that. And then when we come together as a team, it's amplified. And that's really where the magic of this framework is understanding an entire team and how everyone can collaborate and not only drive the best out of each other, but also be able to benefit as a whole from the team. So I'm going to do a quick breakdown on the geniuses. So there's a total of 6 of them. If you pay attention, the first letter of each genius actually winds up spelling the word widget. So there's wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity, right? So widget. I'm going to go through all of those. So the genius of wonder is people that are naturally inclined to be super curious, ask big questions, looking for improvements or reimagining things that already exist. So they might ask a lot of questions that begin with, well, what if we, or have we ever thought about? Those are the types of questions that a person with the genius of wonder might ask. Invention is the next genius, and those are the problem solvers, right? They would be the ones that would attempt to answer the wonder questions. So they come up with all sorts of innovative ideas. Sometimes they're great ideas, sometimes they're not great ideas, right? Their zone of genius is just coming up with ideas. The next one is discernment. So those are people that just have an intuition. Their gut tells them based off of their learned patterns, history, if something just feels right or maybe doesn't feel right. And I will say, I personally That is one of my geniuses, is discernment. And I'll share, funny enough, that some of my closest friends and family tend to call me Debbie Downer, right? Because I'm always the one that's sort of poking holes and like, oh, that might not work because of XYZ. And that's not my intention, right? Like, I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to help us to think a few steps ahead and be like, okay, well, what could go wrong with this? And what could we do now to avoid that? So that's one example of discernment, right? Is something tells me that this might not quite be right. There's not always the data to back it up, but it's discernment. It's kind of thinking through and fleshing out of ideas. The next genius is galvanizing. So think of these as the ones that rally the troops, motivate people to get moving, cheerleaders that get other people into action, right? So if you think about it, I'm sure you can either identify with some of these geniuses, or you can think of people in your group that like, oh, I bet they have this genius. Enablement is the next one. So these are the helpers, the supporters. You might find these people saying like, how can I help you? What can I do to support you? And actually take the step to remove roadblocks, and enable other people to do their work. And then the last genius is tenacity. So think of those as the finishers, the closers, the people that want to, get things done, right? If they have that to-do list, they want to make sure they will not feel satisfied until things are done on that list, right? So of those 6 geniuses, all of us have 2 that were more naturally inclined. And you may have even, hearing me describe them, might have said like, oh, I'm pretty sure my genius is discernment and galvanizing, or galvanizing and tenacity, right? You might have heard those descriptions and already related to some of them, or maybe thought of people in your circle that you could relate to some of those geniuses. And the important thing to note here is that there is no combination of geniuses that is better than the others. Regardless of your combination or your team's combination, there's literally not a better or worse combination. That's not the point of this framework. The point is understanding what ours are and what our teams are and how those come together, because it will impact how we communicate, how we operate, and will contribute to the success of any project that we might have. I'll give you a quick example of a team that I worked with where the leader of the team had the geniuses of wonder and invention, right? So he was churning out ideas all day long, but again, they weren't fully fleshed ideas, right? They were just ideas. So maybe some of them were great, some of them not so great, but he was the leader, right? And on the rest of his team, he had a lot of discernment and tenacity amongst his collective team. So within that dynamic, he kept throwing out new ideas, new initiatives, and just expecting people to run with them because he was coming up with all these, in his mind, great ideas. But his team had discernment. And so they were asking questions, they were pushing back, they were poking holes. And initially, he thought they were just being difficult, right? Like they were giving him a hard time. And a lot of his team thought, oh, he's being delusional, right? He's coming up with all these ideas that don't even make sense. And once we were able to introduce the framework, and actually do a little bit more deeper work with this team, it was like a light bulb, because they realized, oh, okay, people are not trying to be combative or difficult or make anyone's job more difficult. We actually need each other because we need his ideas, but he needs us to better flush out his ideas so the work that we actually do makes sense. They needed structure and they needed ideas. And once that awareness and that common language came to fruition, they started looking at how they were working together, right? And how they needed to be working together. And that was really the beginning of a long evolution of improvements and a turnaround, right? So you could imagine how people were feeling before they knew about the framework, and frustration and anger. And once they actually tapped into uncovering a little bit more about their team and intentions and being able to hold each other accountable, that improved productivity, and it improved collaboration, and it improved job satisfaction, right? Because people knew that they were working towards collective goals and that they really had a team that was supportive and had their back, and they were all working towards, the same aligned pieces of work. So can you, specifically listening to this session, think of someone on your team or in your inner circle that maybe frustrates you? The comments they make, the questions they ask, like, why do you always go there, right? Why do you always kind of take us back or jump 2 steps ahead, or whatever the case is, right? If you can think of a person like that in your inner circle, I would challenge you to look at whatever that frustration is for you and consider how it might be a strength, right? So we go back to my example on the Debbie Downer thing that my family likes to jokingly share with me, right? What if they saw that as not me trying to be negative, but actually me trying to help us collectively have better ideas and improve our likelihood of success, right? Because that, at the end of the day, that is the truth, although it may not feel or seem like it to others that don't have the same way of thinking. So that would be my challenge for you, right? Is think about some frustrations that you may have with people in your circle and consider how those things could actually be positive versus just a difficult way of interacting. If you've had any insights so far, kind of thinking of ways that this could apply to your team, I would encourage you to consider having this conversation as a team. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what that looks like is we do assessments, and these individual assessments are like 10 to 15 minutes max, really depends on how long you consider it. They're not super complicated or involved, but a handful of questions that will give you, as an individual, results right away, which is great, right? But at the end of the day, where the true impact of this happens is in these workshops, we would collect them all together and create what's called a team map, and really look at the collective geniuses and frustrations of an entire team, and delve into the insights of, okay, these are probably common things that are happening in your team, and these are ways that we can either reframe it or improve or change or consider or just have awareness of. They're really foundational for an evolution of improved productivity, collaboration, and I will say, like, actual enjoyment from work, right? Because one of my things is yes, work is work, but that doesn't mean that it has to be dreadful every day. There could be plenty of pieces of work that we can actually enjoy and derive satisfaction from. And the more that we can do that, why would we not want to? Why would we not want to enjoy the things that consume so much of our day, or find ways to make it at least easier, if not enjoyable? And when we come back to, speaking of teams, right? A lot of the sources of stress is precisely judgment, judgment of others, or if we internalize that, right, like guilt of why we don't do things the same way as other people do them. And so there can be a combination of those things, right? Why aren't other people like me, or why am I not like other people, whatever the case is. And I will say, whatever side of the fence you're on, and maybe it's both, you are absolutely not alone. This is a very human, normal thing, the way that our brains work. But I would also say a lot of that judgment and guilt is based off either misinterpretation or just a skewed perspective of the situation really is. Because we judge what we don't necessarily understand, and we assume that everyone operates the way that we do, with the same skills and talents, which is not always the case, right? So if you get annoyed someone that is constantly asking questions, right? And you're just trying to get things done, consider the fact that maybe that person is one that has the genius of wonder, right? Like that is just the way that their brain is naturally wired, and that is not a bad thing. That is their zone of genius. So where are opportunities where we can leverage that versus just think of it as a negative, and why is this person always asking questions when I'm just trying to get my work done, type of thing. It's like expecting a fish to climb a tree and then judging it because it couldn't do it, right? How does that make sense? That is not the way a fish is able to move around, right? A fish needs water and a fish swims. A fish does not climb out of the water and climb up a tree. That would not make sense, right? But and it's an extreme example, but it's similar to how we sometimes expect others to behave a certain way when that is just not in their nature. That is not going to happen without a ton of misplaced time and a lot of frustration. And it's not the best use of time, right? Because you can accomplish so much more when you're able to focus more energy in your zones of genius versus trying to get better at things that don't come naturally to you anyway. Now, I'm not saying find your geniuses and only do the work there, right? Life and work require for us to dabble in all the zones of genius. But when we can understand how our brain correlates to what we're doing, we can either focus on certain types of work, or we can um, give ourselves a little bit of grace, right? When we're not able to do things maybe as quickly or as easily as others, because we know, okay, that's not my zone of genius. So I can have a little self-compassion. I can have a little grace with myself, and know that there's reasons why it doesn't come naturally. But hey, I excel over here, and once I'm done with this task that is not even very fulfilling anyway, I can move on to the more enjoyable work that I do a really good job at. So next time some of that frustration shows up, whether it's with yourself or with others, have grace or get curious, right? If it's somebody else, say, how is this person trying to be helpful versus just assuming that they're trying to make things more difficult. And that curiosity can shift the outcomes, right? Because you get curious, you might learn something, you might find a better way to collaborate with your team. So obviously the goal is to help people understand each other better, but it's also to help teams work better together and actually enjoy the process. And when people feel safe to say like, "Oh, I really enjoy this," or "Oh my gosh, this energizes me so much," or even say the opposite, right? Like, "Oh, this is the part that really drains me." If we're able to say that without shame and we understand each other, we can give a little bit of a grace to others to know like, okay, I know I know David is not great in the invention stage, and that's really what we are trying to do is come up with new ideas. So I'm not going to judge him if he doesn't have a great laundry list of ideas, right? Because I know that this is difficult. But if he's trying and if he's giving ideas, then I can really appreciate that, right? Because I know that it's not easy for him. Makes it more tolerable for him, and then also gives a little bit of understanding on how we interact. And having that understanding and collaboration really helps reduce the drama, the frustration, the blaming, and the opposite really happens, right? Is people feel supported, people feel understood, people feel open to be a little bit more vulnerable and share the why behind certain things. And it really makes for stronger teams and for people that actually want to stay around at a company because that's normal, right? That's normal desire for people to want to be in areas where they feel seen and supported. So if any of this resonated with you, if you have questions, I didn't see any comments come through. I apologize if I missed them, but if any of this resonated with you, and you have interest in having a hands-on half-day workshop with a team map and a plan of action, please feel free to reach out. I am doing a 10% offer for anyone that mentions this webinar. So if you have interest, please reach out. And regardless, if you want to apply this today, you can take the assessment online. You can reach out to me. I can give you a code. Happy to do it. But I want you to take this away with you, right? These 3 points. Work doesn't have to be exhausting. It can actually be energizing and play to your strengths. Frustration often comes from misunderstanding, not people trying to make things more difficult or not incompetence, but misunderstanding. And then judgment and guilt can fade away when you understand yours and other people's geniuses, and it can be replaced by joy. So that is all the time that we have for today. I appreciate that you were able to join. Look forward to catching up with you all in the comments. And like I said, if you are interested in a workshop, reach out, mention this webinar, and we will get you 10% off. Thank you so much. Hope you're having a great day.